How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the demon god and got harem? Part 1. Huge shout out to XxNIVEKxX for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. The Monster World. A dimensional world, home to all races of monsters. Split from the human world by a dimensional barrier, it was created from the gods. Some say the gods created the monsters to test how lifeforms would adapt with powers. Some say they are freaks of nature. No one truly knows what was the true reason of the existence of the monsters. What is known, however, is that humans and monsters were in a never-ending war, each one wanting to exterminate the other. However, the dimensional barrier of the gods forbade it. So, the majority of the monsters were secluded in their own world, growing in power and knowledge. They formed organizations and positions of power, usually complemented by the power of a race. They created a monster ranking system, with the lowest being E rank and the highest S rank. In the entire world, only 4 known races have been accepted as the dreadful S ranks. First were the Yako. Yako were humanoid creatures, the size of humans or taller, with intricate tattoo-like markings all over their body. They possessed tails, the more tails a Yako had the stronger it was. The strongest Yakos in history were mostly with 8 tails. They were rumored to have the blood of a kitsune, because of their famed kitsunebi. The second race was the Phoenix. Phoenixes were large, majestic fire-covered birds with glowing eyes and tremendous eyes. They had incredible power, as a fully charged blast of their fire were strong enough to bring down mountains. They were quite secluded, in the peaks of volcanoes, coming down only for hunts and war, or for special occasions that have to do with the entire monster world. The strongest were the Black Phoenixes. The third race was the werewolf. Werewolves are human-looking beasts, though under the effect of a moon, they transform into large wolves, walking on 2 legs, with incredible power and unmatched speed. The strongest a werewolf can go is under the effect of a full moon. The most powerful werewolves, called alpha werewolves, however, are capable of transforming any time, though their strength does increase under the moon. Finally, they were the vampires. Vampires are human-like monsters of great beauty. They usually have red eyes and fangs to suck out blood. They possess monster strength, toughness and huge reserves of yokai power, the energy of the monsters. They are considered the strongest monsters, with only werewolves able to match their combat prowess. Among them, the descendants of the Shinso were something like royalty. However, there once existed a race of 10 beings far greater than even the vampires. So terrifying, so strong, that the monsters couldn't rank them as even SS rank, a title so rare that only a few Shinso vampires, alpha werewolves, 8-tailed Yoko and black phoenixes, were capable to reach. They were called the Bijuu. It was in the Dark Ages, the time of Alucard, otherwise known as the oldest vampire, a few centuries before he was defeated by the 3 great Dark Lords. 10 beasts appeared in the world, so powerful that even Alucard was weak against them. They took over the monster world by storm, with many great monsters attempting to defeat them, either for fame and fortune, or to be rid of their threat. Only Alucard was capable of barely defeating their lowest in power, however, he suffered great injuries that didn't heal even during the time he was defeated by the Dark Lords. Their strength was so great that they were considered the royalty of monsters, godlike beings that crashed down to the earth, with their leader widely regarded as a god of monsters. All of the Bijuu were always in their large monster form to display their fearsome strength, except their leader, who didn't need to. The first of the Bijuu resembled a tanuki. Its skin was a sandy brown color, with dark blue markings running all over his body. He had a jagged mouth with no tongue. Its eyes had black sclera, with yellower eyes and pupils resembling a 4-pointed star, with 4 dots around it. It possessed 1 large spiked tail. It was called the Ichibi. The second Bijuu resembled a Bakaneko. Its body was completely engulfed in azure flames. It had 2 different colored pupilless eyes, 1 green and 1 yellow. It had 2 tails behind it, also engulfed in azure flames. It was called the Nibi. The third Bijuu resembled a turtle. It had a gray crab-like shell, with spikes running all over his body, except the belly. It had red muscle tissue, with a pair of gray hands, but no hind legs. Its face was covered by a spiked forehead and jaw, with 1 red eye with yellow pupils. It had 3 shrimp-like tails behind it. It was called the Sambi. The fourth Bijuu resembled an ape. It had the body build of a gorilla, with red fur and green skin. It had yellower eyes with white pupils. Its face had elongated blunt fangs and 2 large horns in his forehead resembling a crown. It had 4 large tails, with spike-like protrusions running along them. It was called the Yonbi. The fifth Bijuu resembled a horse, but with the head of S fur was white, with tanned horns and hooves. Its dark blue-green eyes had red markings below them, it had 5 white tails, and it was called the Gobi. The sixth Bijuu resembled a large slug, it was white with a bluish tint. It was bipedal, with small arms and feet. It had optical tentacles for eyes and holes for a mouth. His entire body, from his head to his 6 tails, was covered in a slimy substance. It was called the Rakubi. The 7th Bijuu resembled an armored kabutomushi, the armor blue. An orange glow came from inside its helmet-like skull. It had spikes on its shoulders, with a row of slits below them and 6 legs, 3 on each side. Its face had 2 pincers and 2 large horns. It had 6 tie-like orange wings, with an actual green tail. It was called the Nanabi. The 8th Bijuu resembled an Uchi Oni, with 4 large horns on his head. It had a muscular upper body, with spiked protrusions on the elbows. It had straight teeth and pure white eyes. It had 8 octopus tails growing behind him, using them as legs. It was called the Hachibi. The 9th Bijuu was the biggest, resembling a kitsune. It had red fur, with the upper body resembling that of a human. Its eyes were red with slits. It had 9 enormous tails running behind it. It was called the QB, master of the Yaokos. The 10th Bijuu had a different appearance, as it was always in its human form. It stood at 6'4" with a ripped frame. His hair was golden, with black streaks running through it. He had blood-red eyes, with slit pupils similar to a wolf. His face was angular, with a strong jaw and 3 dense whisker-like marks on each cheeks. He was wearing a dark gray robe, concealing his entire figure. The black Yoki aura with a red outline surrounded him, with 2 wolf ears and 10 ethereal white tails with red outline behind him. He was called the Juubi, god of monsters. The monsters tried for a long time to bring down the Bijuu, though each attempt failed, as the Achibi alone could take on an entire battalion of vampires. A lot of blood was spilled throughout the years, so they turned to sealing. Through the loss of many lives, they sealed 8 Bijuu inside different isolated locations in the monster world, powered by 1,000 seals and holy artifacts. The QB was sealed in another dimension, as its power was too great to be contained in any location. The Juubi escaped with little effort, swearing to free his brothers and sisters. For hundreds of years no one has seen him. The years passed and the tale of the royal monsters became a legend, with only the still alive survivors remembering the horrors of that war. But soon, everything would change. The world would soon feel the power of the demon god. Yokai Academy. In the headmaster's room of Yokai Academy, sat Tenmei Mikagami. He was one of the 3 Dark Lords, one of the most powerful demons of his age, and is known as the Exorcist, as he wore clothes resembling a priest. He was sighing, dealing with paperwork. Suddenly, he felt an enormous wave of pressure fall upon him, so strong that he fell to the floor in pure fear. He knew this aura, this terrifying power, this otherworldly energy. He was only a young demon back then, but he knew it. He looked up, pure terror in his eyes, and saw him. He stood in front of the closed door, looking exactly the same as he did back then, with his clothes the only difference. He had his arms crossed and was looking down at him. It's been a long time, Tenmei Mikagami. My name is Shinju Naruto, but you can call me the Juubi no Kami, he said, in a tone of great power. Thus. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and there was a calm breeze, a wind of change. Inside a bus, next to a window, stood Naruto, his arms supporting his face, a bored yet sharp look in his eyes. He was wearing black jeans, black boots, a black belt with a square golden buckle that had the letter N carved on it. For his torso, he wore a blood-red muscle shirt that did little to hide his incredible build, with a black leather jacket above it, zipped halfway up. Hanging around his neck was a necklace with a pitch-black diamond. He was currently observing the countryside, on his way to Yokai Academy, with only him and the driver inside the bus. He remembered his meeting with the headmaster. Flashback. Naruto looked down at Tenmei Mikagami, releasing his powerful pressure slightly, giving him the necessary room to breathe and speak. Tenmei rose slightly, panting, as sweat formed on his face. His power isn't the same. No, I can tell even by this little amount it has grown stronger by leagues. He thought. Naruto looked at him. I want to enroll in Yokai Academy as a student, he said, surprising Tenmei. And why would you want that, Naruto-sama? He said, only to fall back to the ground from a new burst of power. Naruto narrowed his eyes. That is for me to know, Dark Lord, he said with sarcasm. Also, I refuse to wear that abomination you call a uniform, he added, crossing his arms. Tenmei simply nodded. Naruto went to leave but stopped. He turned his head to him, his eyes glowing. If you speak to anyone about me, consider yourself booked for a trip straight to oblivion, he said, his tone filled with malice as all color left Tenmei's face. He disappeared in black smoke as the pressure was lifted. Tenmei gasped for breath. He painfully rose. Of all that could happen, this managed to happen. He thought. Flashback end. Naruto's train of thought was stopped as the bus came to a halt. The door opened and a teenager with black hair and brown eyes entered. He was wearing the male uniform of Yokai Academy students, which consisted of a white shirt with buttons, a red tie and a green jacket with the school's emblem. He also wore brown pants and green loafers. He noticed only Naruto was inside the bus, but the blonde's red eyes and sharp look scared him, so he sat down 2 seats forward. Naruto sniffed the air and narrowed his eyes. What is a human doing in a school of monsters? Beats me, though if the kid passes the first lesson without any student realizing it, I will be impressed at him and disappointed at the males of the school. He said, with a light smirk. He heard the bus driver talk to the boy. Hey, are you attending Yokai Academy? He asked, as the boy nodded. Then be prepared. It is a scary school. He said, as the boy raised an eyebrow but was interrupted by his phone. He picked it up and started chatting, as Naruto went back to his thoughts. Yokai Academy. The bus stopped, as the human first went outside impaling at the surroundings. The bus driver smirked, though it disappeared, with sweat forming on his face as Naruto slowly walked out of the bus. That kid's aura was so dark, he felt like death was certain against him. He quickly drove away. Naruto tapped the boy lightly on the shoulder, though the boy cringed as his strength, even at its lowest, was well over the strongest humans. Listen up, kid. Be careful in this school. He said, walking ahead. Sukun looked slightly scared. Naruto walked around, observing the different decorations. He noted the blood river and shook his head. He suddenly heard a cry of "look out!" and sighed, raising his arm. He caught a female waist as a bike crashed on his shoulder, only to get destroyed as if it hit a wall of cement. He looked at the girl as he placed her down. She had a fair face, long pink hair and emerald green eyes that gave her an exotic look. She had a curvy figure with cup wrists and a firm rear. She was wearing the female outfit of Yokai Academy students, which consisted of the green jacket above a white shirt and a brown skirt with brown shoes. She blinked, then blushed lightly at the handsome blonde. She smiled. I am sorry. I am anemic, so I didn't watch where I was going. She said, as he nodded. It is quite fine. He said, then she noticed something. Blood flowed from his neck slightly, probably from the bike crash. Her blush deepened as the smell was intoxicating to her. She suddenly bit his neck, drinking his blood as he raised an eyebrow. She widened her eyes. That was the sweetest blood she had ever tasted, full of energy. She licked the part where she bit him, only to notice there was no wound. She raised an eyebrow as she was sure there was a scratch. She then widened her eyes, blushing. Sorry. I am a vampire and your blood seems so delicious. She said, as he smirked. I told you it is fine. He said, picking up the bike from your attire. I assume you will be a freshman of Yokai Academy. He said as she nodded. She walked with him. That is right. Are you as well? She asked, which he nodded. She looked at him, then looked to the ground. Could you be my friend? I don't know anyone here. She said, as he looked at her. He smirked slightly. I thought we already were friends. He said, as she glumped him with a smirk. Sighing, they went their way to the academy. They split once they arrived, as the males and females were picking up their class schedules on different locations. Naruto was walking around, trying to find class 103. He soon found it, entering. Once inside, the females looked at him with blushes due to his face and look, while the boys looked at him in envy. He sat down to the corner of the class as the teacher, a woman with blonde hair and closed eyes, wearing an orange blouse below a white shirt and a brown skirt, started the lesson. She smiled. Hello everyone. Welcome to Yokai Academy. I am your form room teacher, Nekonim Shizuka. She said cheerfully. As you already know, this is a school for monsters. She said. Naruto felt the fear coming off Sukun, who was sitting in front of him, and chuckled lowly. The world is under the occupation of the humans, so for us to survive, we must learn to coexist with them. She explained. So rule number 1. Never reveal your true form unless in certain situations. Rule number 2. No one should know of your true form. Remember these rules. She exclaimed happily. The student huffed. What boring rules. We should just eat the humans. Saizu said, as Tsukun's fear increased. Shizuka continued. For that reason, any human will be killed on the spot. She said, as Tsukun almost fainted. Suddenly, the door opened as Moka entered. Sorry I am late. She said, then bowed with a smile. I am Akashiya Moka. Pleased to meet you. She exclaimed happily as the men gave her lecherous grins. She suddenly saw Naruto and squealed, rushing and glumping him, to the hate of all guys in the room, effectively stopping the lesson. Hallways. Everyone looked at Moka, walking the hallways, dragging Naruto by the hand, unconsciously placing it between her wrists, as both girls and boys sent glares, the girls at Moka, the boys at Naruto. They went to a vending machine, Moka getting a tomato juice and Naruto coffee. Suddenly, Saizu came and picked Naruto by his shirt, lifting him. What are you doing, Moka-chan? With a lowlife like him? Why don't you ditch him and act? He screamed as Naruto broke his arm in 5 different spots with a single jab. Saizu held his arm in pain before Naruto flicked him on his forehead with his finger, sending him crashing into a wall. Naruto picked Moka and led her away. Rooftop. Moka and Naruto were sitting on the rooftop. Moka turned to him. Hey Naruto-kun, what is your true form? She then put her hand in her mouth. Oh, I am sorry, we aren't allowed to reveal of true forms. She said. Naruto looked at her. Speaking of true forms, you don't really look like a true vampire. He said, as she showed him the rosary. It's because of this. If this is taken off, I will turn into a scary vampire. That is why even I can't remove it. She said. A growl was heard as Moka blushed. She looked at him. Could I drink your blood? She asked as he revealed his neck. Squealing, she bit him, sucking his blood as she moaned at the taste. He shook his head. She seems addicted. He thought. Suddenly, the bell rung and they parted ways, as now had different classes. Courtyard. Naruto walked around the courtyard, wondering where Moka was. His extra keen ears heard her scream as he teleported to her location. There, she saw her below a tree, looking terrified at Saizo, who was in his true form, a large muscular orc. He disappeared and flicked him to a tree. Saizo roared, "Stay away. She is mine." He roared as Naruto picked up Moka. Smirking, he took off her Rosario, to her surprise, as a large wave of Yaki surrounded the area, as Saizo looked scared. Naruto looked at Moka's new appearance with interest. She stood slightly taller, with a curvier body, wider hips and larger wrists, going to D-cup. Her eyes were blood red and her hair silver white. She looked at Naruto then smirked at Saizo. "So you're the one who awakened me?" She asked, as Saizo was trembling. Silver hair, red eyes, terrifying power. "This is an S-class monster, a vampire," he said, as she smirked, stretching. Saizo's body was trembling, then he growled, "It doesn't matter if you're a vampire. I will beat you," he said. She yawned, then looked at him. "Know your place," she said, kicking him into a rock as he fell unconscious. She turned to Naruto, approaching him, her hands in her hips, a seductive sway of her hips in her movement. She looked at him. "I sense a great power within you. Power far greater than even my father, a being beyond S-class. What are you?" She spoke with great interest. He smirked as he approached her. "Something worth discovering on your own," he said, as she smirked. She bit his neck, savoring the taste of his blood. She looked at him. "I look forward to figuring you out, Naruto-kun," she said, as he placed the Rosario back on. Before she disappeared, she said, "Take care of outer Moka." As Moka turned back to her normal form, unconscious, Naruto looked at her. Sighing, he picked her up bridal style. As he was making his way back school, he thought things might get interesting before I start my plan. Yokai Academy. The week had passed since Naruto's arrival to Yokai Academy. So far, everything was peaceful. Naruto enjoyed it slightly, as for quite a while he didn't have a chance to relax. He passed the days with Moka, who was clinging to him and drinking his blood whenever she could. He didn't mind as she seemed to enjoy it. Besides, his blood regenerated almost instantly after the wound was closed, so it wasn't like he was hurt, while at the same time it wasn't like he would turn into a vampire. His powers were too great for that. And from her continuous drinking, she didn't seem to suffer any effects either, so everything was cool. He enjoyed Moka, as her hyperactivity and fun nature eased up his own strict nature. Lesson had ended a few minutes ago, and he had to use the bathroom, so Moka went out her way to the courtyard. He was looking for her when she heard her shout his name. He turned and narrowed his eyes slightly. She was sitting on a bench, with an awkward feeling Tsukun next to her, as Moka held his arm. He approached them slowly, as Moka hugged him. All the while, he was looking at Tsukun, who was gulping. She let go of him and gestured at Tsukun. "Naruto-kun, this is Tsukun-kun, a new friend of mine. Could you please be friends with him?" she asked him, smiling cutely. Naruto turned to Tsukun. He looked at him for a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity to Tsukun, and raised his arm slowly. Tsukun shook it, only to close his eyes in pain, as Naruto's supernatural strength made his arm dark red. Naruto let go and placed an arm on Tsukun. "Moka-chan, can you please wait here? Me and Tsukun must have a man conversation. I promise not to hurt him," he said, to ease her worried look. He took Tsukun a few feet away, out of Moka's ear reach, then turned to him, crossing his arms. "Tell me, why did you want to be friends with Moka?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Tsukun gulped, seeing Naruto's blood-red, slitted eyes appearing as if they could pierce his soul. "Because she is the most friendly person in our class," he stuttered. Naruto continued, "Does it have anything to do with her beauty, physical or mental?" Tsukun shook his head. "No. I just want to be her friend cause she seems like a nice person," he admitted. Naruto looked at him for a minute, to Tsukun's growing anxiousness, then nodded. Naruto outstretched his arm to the right, palm facing upwards, as to Tsukun's surprise, a hole appeared above his arm in the air. A pair of greenish-black nunchaku fell down. He threw them at Tsukun, along with a scroll. "If you are to be Moka's friend, not to mention live in a monster school, you should gain some powers. Those nunchaku are sentient. The more you train with them and bond with them, the stronger you will become. The scroll contains a training schedule and a nunchaku style. Get to work when you got free time," he said, as he left, then stopped. He turned to him. "Tell Moka I have some work to do." he added, going his own way, as Tsukun nodded with surprise and walked back to Moka. I should have given this to that philosophy teacher before I went to Moka. He thought, holding an envelope. Shizuka asked him to give this to that teacher before he left class and he accepted. But he had to go to the bathroom, then went to find Moka and he forgot. He remembered it later on. As he was walking, he heard a cry of help. He turned, seeing a girl on her knees, next to a large root of a tree. He observed her with slight interest, as she looked at him. She had light blue hair tied with a purple headband, and her eyes were purple. She had a curvy figure, with huge wrists, reaching an H-cup. She didn't wear the school's uniform, instead wearing a long-sleeved white shirt with a red bow tie, with a yellow vest above that. She also had a brown check skirt and white shoes. He raised her to her feet, as she pressed her wrists at his chest, getting a raised eyebrow. She smiled. Thank you for helping me. She said, then she changed her smile to a seductive one. Will you be mine, Naruto-kun? She asked, her eyes glowing slightly. Naruto felt a sudden attempt to invade his head and dispelled the illusion. He pushed her back as she yelped and fell on her back. He looked at her with narrowed eyes. If you ever attempt to try and hypnotize me again, you will regret it. He threatened, before living. Kurumu looked shocked, then narrowed her eyes, clenching her teeth. Hallway. Moka was drinking some tomato juice when Kurumu approached her, hate-filled eyes. It's all your fault, Akashiya Moka. She accused, pointing at her. A crowd gathered, with the boys whistling and drooling at Kurumu's massive wrists. Moka took a step back in surprise and blinked. What did I do? She asked. She growled. Don't play innocent. You are in the way of my grand plan. She said, as Moka looked confused. My plan is to turn all the males in Yokai Academy into my love slaves. Yes, the flawless plan of the succubus Kurumu Kurono. She shouted, with many of the boys nodding, not minding to be her slave. Moka raised an eyebrow, sweat dropping at the plan. Isn't it against the rules to reveal your true form? She asked. However, all the boys fall for you. She said, fire appearing in her eyes. I won't lose to you. She yelled, as sparks flew from the girl's eyes. The boys had stars in their eyes. Catfight. They yelled. What ensued was the hottest catfight the school males had ever seen, as the two girls bit, pulled and slapped everywhere they could. Kurumu was pulling on Moka's hair as she scratched her arms, while Moka was biting her shoulder, clawing her stomach. Suddenly, Kurumu kneed the rather combat inexperienced outer Moka in her stomach as she gasped for air. Kurumu reared her arm back, going to slap her. However, a hand grabbed her wrist in mid-attack. Everyone gasped as Naruto appeared out of thin air and grabbed her arm. He looked at the two women. What is going on here? He asked. Kurumu leaned to him, then pointed at Moka. She started it. She said, then tried her strongest illusion on him. Please punish her, Naruto-kun. She purred seductively. However, Naruto narrowed his eyes. He pushed her to the ground, causing her to gasp. He turned to Moka. What happened, Moka? He asked. She pointed at Kurumu. She said, I am in her way to turn all boys in school into slaves. As Kurumu growled, why do you care? It is you who keep him as a food source. She accused, with Moka widening her eyes. Tears formed in her eyes as she attempted to run off. However, she fell on the chest of someone. She looked up, only to see another Naruto. Suddenly, an ominous aura was felt. All the students reared back as Naruto looked angry. He towered over Kurumu as she felt like an ant in front of a lion. He growled, it was my decision to allow her to drink my blood and I support it fully. Now, you hurt my friend. Apologize or face the consequences. He growled as Kurumu looked down. She muttered something, only for Naruto to say louder. She mumbled an apology as Naruto nodded. He turned and grabbed Moka as the clone dispelled and both of them left the building. Forest. Naruto was walking around the forest, trying to console a sad Moka. Suddenly, he turned, Moka slowly following his action. There stood Kurumu with a strong look in her face. Naruto raised an eyebrow as she transformed into her true form. Two demonic wings grew from her back, a demonic tail from her rear, and her nails turned to large claws. She narrowed her eyes. I challenge you, Moka Akashiya, for the right of Naruto. She yelled, charging. Naruto smirked as he took off in one swift move the Rosario as a column of Yaki rose, with Kurumu stopping midway, fear in her eyes. Inner Moka was revealed, looking at Kurumu with an arrogant smirk. Sweat formed on Kurumu's face. Is this a vampire's true form, a true S-ranked monster? She said out loud, with Moka disappearing and appearing in front of her. Your body will determine the rumors, little succubus. She said, as Kurumu attempted to slice her. She dodged the strikes and grabbed her tail, raising her to the air. Learn your place. She said, kicking her through 3 trees before she slammed and bounced off a thick log. She looked up terrified as Moka raised her leg in an axe kick, attempting to break her. However, Naruto appeared and caught her leg effortlessly, to her surprise. She narrowed her eyes at him. Why? She asked as Naruto turned to Kurumu. You do this to find your destined one? He asked as Kurumu widened her eyes, then nodded. He sighed and let go of Moka. Your destined one will be a man you truly love. Capturing boys won't bring you near. He finished. He then turned to Moka. She isn't worth killing. He said as she frowned but understood. He placed a Rosario back as she said, take care of outer Moka. Then she fell unconscious. As the pressure dissipated, Kurumu also fell unconscious. Naruto sighed, making a clone. The real one picked up Moka, the clone picked up Kurumu, and they both went to the infirmary. Next day. Naruto woke up from his alarm clock, smashing it to bits with a punch. He opened his eyes, blinked in annoyance, then picked up a new clock. He rose with a yawn and went to the bathroom. Unlike most dorms, his had a bathroom inside, so he didn't have to use the men's bathroom. He did all of his morning activities before dressing and escaping his room. He had nothing to do for a while, as school didn't start in an hour. He merely went to a vending machine and picked up some coffee. He stood outside the men's bathroom, leaning on the wall and taking a few sips from time to time. He observed as the male students rushed to finish their activities quickly. A few of them were complaining because they turned in their true form in the middle of the night. He shook his head as it showed they didn't have control over their power. He noticed Sukun coming out of the bathroom. Sukun saw Naruto and waved, with Naruto nodding at him. Get dressed up. He said, turning back to the students. Sukun nodded and in 10 minutes, he returned in his school uniform. They walked towards the academy, as the dorms were in separate buildings. They saw a large whiteboard outside, as Sukun sighed. This is what I thought I forgot. The results came out. He said, looking at his score and seeing he was 124th. He sighed then turned to Naruto. What score did you get, Naruto-san? He asked, as Naruto pointed. He looked at the direction only to widen, as he was ranked first, with a flawless score and extra points for his pinpoint detailed answers. He looked down, as Naruto huffed. Don't let it get in your head. For your condition, you did very well, unlike some others. He said, addressing 3 goblins who were cheering. They got to the 200 ranks. It sickened him that they were proud of that, but he chose to pay a little attention. Suddenly, he turned his attention to cheers. Moka was walking towards them as all boys cheered her. She smiled, rushing and glumping Naruto. Hey Naruto-kun. Hi Tsukun-kun. She greeted them, as they nodded with smiles. Sukun looked at the board and gasped. Moka-san, you're 5th. He exclaimed as she nodded, frowning. I am 124th. He mumbled as she smiled. I am sure if you try harder, you will reach the 80th seats next time. She said, lifting Tsukun's spirits. She turned to Naruto, grinning. And you Naruto-kun. You reached 1st place. Congratulations. She yelled, as he shook his head with a smirk. It was nothing. He exclaimed. However, all 3 of them turned as they heard commotion. They looked to see 3 students surrounding a small girl. She was quite short and wore a witch outfit, revealing what her true form was. She was looking with slight fear at an older boy. He smirked at her. Congratulations, Yukari Sendo. You got rank 2nd. But it is expected of a girl with your level of intelligence. You didn't skip grades for nothing. However. He said, narrowing his eyes. Don't get beepy. She looked at him, holding her pink, heart-shaped with a blue 5-pointed star inside one. Beepy? She asked. He pointed at her outfit. Your attire looks like cosplay. And it goes against the school's dressing code. He said, holding his head seriously. You give me headaches. Yukari looked down, as she moved her wand behind her back. Suddenly, 3 baskets fell on their heads, as they crashed to the ground, with her smiling. They growled, extending their claws. Why you little, the class representative said. However, he was forced to stop as Moka appeared midway. Please stop. Don't use violence against girls. She begged, as the representative growled. Stay out of the way. He yelled, attempting to hit her. However, Naruto appeared and grabbed his wrist. The representative looked in fear, as he knew Naruto was considered by many the strongest student, having taken down Saizo with one flick of his finger, along with many bullies. He then looked at the pink-haired girl and realized she was his friend, and he was known to be protective of her. He was screwed. Naruto broke his wrist before he flicked him on the forehead, sending him crashing on a tree. He disappeared, chopping another's neck, dropping him to the ground before he looked at the last one and sent him flying into a wall with a small flare of yaki. The students looked in awe as Naruto dusted his hands and turned to Moka. You alright? He asked as she nodded with a smile and a blush. They turned, noticing Yukari. Moka and Tsukun moved in the cafeteria as they talked with Yukari. Naruto was having a talk with the headmaster. They were discussing about Yukari's smartness as she was blushing. No, it's nothing. Moka-san is much more beautiful. In fact, I love you, Moka-san. She yelled, jumping Moka and fondling her as Tsukun was holding the blood coming from his nose. Please go out with me. She said as Moka blushed. Only if it's as friends. She said, getting a squeal from Yukari. Aono looked scared. If Naruto finds out, he thought, pushing the thoughts of the scary blonde aside as he kept looking at them. In the hallways everyone had blushes on their faces as a red Moka was walking the hallways with Tsukun next to her and Yukari behind her, fondling her friests. Wow Moka-chan. Your friests are so big. Mine are ak. She yelled as she was lifted. They turned, seeing a twitching Naruto dropping Yukari to the floor. What is wrong midget? He asked as she glared at him. So you're here. Naruto, top ranks, great athletic skills, you're the typical golden boy, you're not worthy of Moka-chan. She said, waving her wand. Suddenly, brooms flew towards Naruto, only for Naruto to disappear and reappear before Yukari. With a swift move, he took Yukari's staff and bonked her on the head with it. He dropped it back. Be polite. You won't make friends like that. He said, as she smiled. Like I would want to make friends with lower life forms. Besides, I was always alone. She said, before casting a spell that blinded the hallway, as she smiled and escaped. He looked at her retreating form with narrowed eyes. Suddenly, Kurumu rushed at them. I heard Moka got a new girlfriend and I wanted to congratulate. She said, as Moka raised an eyebrow. Why is that? She asked. Kurumu smirked. So that Naruto-kun is all mine. She exclaimed with Moka gasping. No. Stay away from Naruto-kun. She said, as she shook her head. No way. He is my destined one. She said, as the trio raised an eyebrow. Destined one? Kurumu nodded. He stood up to me, so he is my destined one. She said, as they argued. Naruto narrowed his eyes. He approached Tsukun and whispered to his ear. Take care of those two. He said, as he disappeared. Tsukun raised an eyebrow but nonetheless nodded, observing their heated argument. Swamp. Naruto appeared in a swamp outside the school. He looked around before he heard a scream. He teleported to a spot, noticing Yukari her back on a tree, as 3 lizardmen attacked her. Naruto appeared in front of her, throwing a jab at a lizard man's head, piercing through and killing him. He then flicked one's neck, breaking the bones. He did both attacks in the blink of an eye. The lizardman was leaning backwards in fear as Yukari looked at Naruto with widened eyes. Naruto turned to the last lizardman, who attempted to run, but Naruto kicked a branch at him, the branch piercing his heart, killing him instantly. He turned back to her. She gaped at him, then frowned and huffed. I could have taken care of them myself. She said, only to get a jab in the head. Moaning from the pain, she rubbed her neck as Naruto kneeled towards her level. You're not alone. He said, freezing her. I know how you feel. I understand the feeling of loneliness. I once had a family. But they got sent off to some faraway place. So I was alone for a while. But here, I made a few friends and I am no longer alone. Same as you. I am your friend and so is Moka and Tsukun, even Kurumu. He said, as tears formed in her eyes. You're my friends? She asked, as he nodded. Tears flowed freely as she cried on his shoulder. He patted her head, staying there for a few minutes. Class. Inside class 103, Moka, Kurumu, Yukari and Tsukun were all talking, with Naruto leaning on a wall and observing. Once they returned, Yukari apologized for her behavior towards her classmates as they forgave her and apologized for their own treating. Everything seemed back to normal, however, in Naruto's mind, he knew more madness would follow, with him being in the middle. It was troublesome. Yokai Academy. It was a beautiful day in Yokai Academy. The sun was shining brightly, the wind was blowing gently and another point. And Naruto was as powerful as ever. The day was a soccer tournament. All the girls and the non-participating boys were standing on the side, cheering for whichever team they supported. Among them was Moka, cheering for Naruto. On the football field stood 2 teams, one wearing black, the other wearing white. Leading the black team and being their striker was Naruto, with a second striker being Tsukun. While Naruto was not interested in any sport, he knew how to play. And with Moka pleading him using her puppy face, he decided to enter the tournament. And since he was a good guy, he forced Tsukun to attend. He was currently passing through each defender with ease, like they didn't even exist. The moment he had a clear shot, he reared his leg back and kicked the ball, sending it directly at the goalkeeper's stomach, driving him to the net and tearing it, along with bringing the entire goal down. Cheers erupted as he ran his fingers along his hair with a smirk. He nodded to some of his teammates, then changed to his normal attire for class. Everyone let us join a club, said Shizuka as she got raised eyebrows from everyone, including Naruto. The purpose of this school is to teach demons to adapt in human society. That is why we must get a deeper understanding of them by working in their society and coming to contact with their art. She explained as Naruto nodded slowly, then went back to twirling his pen from boredom. Our purpose is to appear exactly like humans. So that is why everyone must be adamant about keeping their true form a secret. She finished as a student raised his arm, then pointed at her tail as the class erupted to snickers when Shizuka scratched him. As soon as the bell rung, each student rushed out, gathering to the spot where all the clubs were introduced. Moka was holding Naruto's arm and dragging him to each club as he shook his head in amusement due to her excitement. They passed many clubs, none of them interesting or enjoyable, from a mummy club to a chemistry one. Eventually, they saw a place where a large part of the male population stood, drooling. Naruto turned there as he observed it. Its leader was a woman with turquoise hair and yellow eyes. She was wearing a purple bikini with a purple towel around her waist. She smiled at the gathered men, taking special notice of Naruto. "My name is Tamao. Please swim with us," she said cutely as the men nodded happily. "All members are currently women. Any man who joins shall have special services by the women," she continued, blowing a kiss at Naruto to Moka's anger. "Please join the club," she said, finishing as many men started signing up. Naruto turned to Moka. "I know you cannot swim, but how about we just stay near the pool and observe them? It might be fun seeing the poor boys learning to swim," he said as she nodded, happy that he didn't join because of her. They stood to the sidelines of the pool, watching as each member was trying to learn how to swim, all the while admiring the girls teaching them. Tamao walked towards him. "Why don't you come and swim with us?" she asked with a pout. He turned. "My friend doesn't feel like swimming," he said. She smiled. "Oh, come and swim. Just for 5 minutes," she said cutely. Naruto turned to Moka. "Do you mind for 5 minutes?" he asked as she shook her head, though a look of jealousy was on her face. He nodded, taking off his vest and shirt as Moka and Tamao blushed furiously at his body. He then took down his jeans, revealing black swim trunks with crimson flames. He jumped inside the water, sighing slightly. However, as soon as he did, two blurs dived in, raising water and almost hitting Moka. From the spots came Kurumu in a yellow bikini and Yukari in a black swimsuit. They grabbed each of his arms, trying to bring him to their sides. This kept going for 5 minutes until Naruto disappeared. He reappeared to the edge of the pool, going to get outside when he felt two soft orbs in his back. Tamao appeared behind him. "And where do you think you're going?" she said seductively as Naruto wasn't affected. 5 minutes passed, he said, then looked down seeing an orange tail. "I am sorry, but once you enter, there is no way out," she said as her teeth became fangs and tried to bite him. He leaned to the side, pushing her to the middle of the pool as Kurumu manifested her wings, bringing her and Yukari out of the water. All the women turned like that, attacking the poor boys who were trying their best to escape. Naruto frowned. "They are mermaids," he said, then turned to Kurumu and Yukari. "Get them out," he said as they did so. Kurumu dived in and started grabbing men, throwing them out of the water as Yukari used her wand to levitate them. Naruto stood inside the water as all the mermaids surrounded him. "What will you do now?" "We're invincible in the water," one yelled as Naruto smirked. Suddenly, they all cried out in pain as black lightning erupted from Naruto's body, electrocuting them badly, but not killing them, dropping them unconscious. He came out to the shocked looks of Kurumu, Yukari and Moka. He looked at her frowning as water seemed to have hit her when the men escaped or when the lightning formed ripples. He grabbed her. "We need to get her to the infirmary," he said as he teleported away. Kurumu and Yukari groaned, taking the long route. 3 hours had passed in the infirmary as Moka was sound asleep. Naruto was sitting in a chair while Kurumu and Yukari were arguing about who was better for him, Moka or Kurumu. He paid them little mind as he was thinking of what to do with the Bijuu. "Even if we're thousands of miles away, I can still feel their presence. Locating them is easy. But from who to start? I must first get out one of the strongest. That leaves me with Nanabi, Hachibi and Kyubi." He started thinking of their abilities. Nanabi was a master of wind, earth and lightning, could fly, used different forms of dust, and had control over all insects. Her best ability though was her crystal manipulation, allowing her to form different crystals, including her special blinding ones, which were faster than the naked eye could track. However, she was weak at powerful fire and water manipulation, while her crystals were weak against lightning. Finally, she was a bit overconfident, taking pride in her air abilities. Hachibi was incredibly strong, with large durability. He was a master of earth, lightning and water manipulation, along with having control over all aquatic lifeforms. However, his greatest ability was his ink manipulation, allowing him to use ink as a weapon, mixing it with attacks to boost power. Mixed with his hand-to-hand combat skills, the best of any Bijuu below him, close range was his domain. However, he is weak to earth and lightning due to his primarily water skills, and his ink is weak against fire. Also, he is quite slow, with only the Rakubi being slower. Finally, he wasn't very sharp. Then there was Kyubi. She had the best physical abilities, her strength and speed the strongest out of the 9. She was a master of wind and fire manipulation, not to mention illusions. Finally, she was unpredictable. However, she was weak against consecutive attacks and sealing abilities. He thought for a while and nodded to himself. "I will come for you soon. Kurama." He was interrupted as Moka woke up. She opened her eyes and clinged on Naruto with a yell as Kurumu and Yukari glared daggers at her. Naruto laughed and petted Moka's head as she looked at him with a puppy face. Knowing what she wanted, he showed her his neck, to which she immediately bit on. She moaned at the sweet taste of his blood, as with each taste she was becoming addicted. Once she finished, Kurumu pushed her back and hugged Naruto, planting her fists in his face. However, Moka tried to push her away. A fight broke out, with Yukari in the middle. He shook his head and left them to their antics. Next day. The day was an uneventful day, however, Naruto knew there never was an uneventful day. As soon as the bell rung and students started leaving, Shizuka approached Naruto. "Naruto-kun, have you joined a club?" she asked, as he shook his head. She smiled. "How about joining the newspaper club?" To which he shrugged. Moka, Kurumu and Yukari popped up. "We're joining." They yelled simultaneously, as Shizuka cheered. Naruto turned to Tsukun, as he nodded with a smile. "I am joining too," he said, with Shizuka looking excited. "Great. 5 people. Meet me here in an hour," she said, as they nodded and left for lunch. Naruto and the rest were sitting in the cafeteria. Naruto was in a rather peculiar situation, as Kurumu was feeding him pudding, not that he minded, while Moka was glaring at her. Kurumu smirked in victory when he ate all her pudding. Yukari and Tsukun were sighing, eating their mashed potatoes. Naruto was drinking his juice when Moka looked at him cutely. "Can I have lunch, Naruto-kun?" she asked, as he smiled and showed his neck. Moka squealed and clinged on him, biting his neck. She moaned instantly at the scent and taste of his blood, as her senses were clouded. She unconsciously sat on his lap and started grinding herself on him, to the surprise of the students and Kurumu's increasing anger. Naruto raised an eyebrow, as he didn't expect the innocent Moka to do something so arousing. He felt his hidden power steering, as his instinct started to getting wild with her actions. He pushed them down, however, as he didn't want to go ballistic inside the cafeteria. After she finished, she licked his blood, then hugged him with a content smile, all the while Kurumu was trying to get her off Naruto. Yep, never an uneventful day. After lunch, they sat in front of Shizuka, as she smiled, showing them a newspaper. "Alright. Let us start the Yokai Academy newspaper club's activity now," she said, but before she could finish, a knock on the door was heard. Inside came a man with reddish-brown eyes and black hair, kept back by a red headband. He wore the male uniform without a tie, leaving his shirt open to show a wolf pendant. He was holding 3 bouquets of roses, smiling. "Nice to meet you. I am Morioka Jin, but please call me Jin from now on," he said, as he gave each girl a bouquet. "Roses fit beautiful girls," he added. Once he said that, something inside Naruto told him to make him his servant, teaching him to stay off his girls, but he put the feeling down, as they weren't even his yet. Shizuka smiled. "Jin is the only second-year member, well, there are no third-year members. Feel free to ask him anything," she exclaimed, with Jin nodding. "You can count on me," he said with a grin, as Shizuka left. The members sat around in a table as Jin started talking. "Now, let me explain the club to you guys. The main purpose of the club is to distribute the school newspaper, report any happenings in the school, and write them on the newspaper. For the sake of reporting, we must put ourselves in danger to acquire information," he said, as Moka whispered to Kurumu. "He seems reliable," with Naruto snorting. "Just kidding, please don't be tense and let us get along," he said. "Anything we may research?" he asked, as Tsukun and the girls started thinking. Well, Naruto looked at Jin. "Compared to most boys here, he has a pretty strong aura," he thought. Suddenly, Kurumu spoke. "There are rumors a man is peeping girls, and he is so fast he hasn't been caught. We can investigate that," she said, as the girls nodded, due to the hatred for perverts. Jin nodded. "If we are to do that, we must first find information," he said, as Tsukun asked how. "We must search around for intel and ask the people," he said. Jin was currently observing Moka and Kurumu trying to place posters up, while Naruto, Tsukun and Yukari were making them. "Raise them higher," said Jin, as Moka and Kurumu yelled higher. They asked as he nodded. "Yes, much higher," he said with a grin. He kneeled, looking below their skirts, until he felt a strong pressure coming from behind. He turned, seeing Naruto looking at him. "You were looking at their skirts, right?" he asked, as Jin acted innocent. "Nonsense. You think I am someone who?" He was interrupted as Naruto whistled. "Girls, he was peeking at your panties," he said, as they screamed and started beating him up. Tsukun's sweat dropped as Naruto turned to him. "How do your nunchakus go?" he asked as he smiled. "Great. I can feel my strength increasing," he said, as Naruto nodded. Next day. "Hey, Naruto-san," Jin said, approaching him. Naruto turned to him. He smiled. "Come with me. I found intel on a place we need to investigate," he said. Naruto raised an eyebrow but followed him nonetheless. Jin guided him to a part of the school where a small window was. Jin pointed at it while taking out his camera. "Go take a look," he said. Naruto smirked. "You think I don't know that is the girls' changing room?" he asked as Jin sweated. Swiftly, he kicked Jin's legs, dropping him down while breaking the camera. "There's a peeping Tom," he yelled, disappearing. The girls screamed and in a few seconds they got to Jin's spot and started beating him up. Jin growled during the beating, "You will pay Naruto. Tonight, on the full moon, Moka will be mine," he thought. It was nighttime as Moka was walking to her dorm. However, she turned into a corner only to spot Jin. He smiled at her. "Hey Moka-chan, can you come with me?" he asked as she nodded with a smile. They went on the roof, the full moon shining brightly. Jin looked at it. "The moon is beautiful tonight," Dottie said as Moka nodded. However, she gasped as Jin hugged her. "Let us be one Moka-chan," he said as she screamed and pushed him back. Jin frowned. "If you will resist, then I shall force you," he said as he roared, lightning surrounding him. His muscles became bigger as silver fur covered him. His head turned into a wolf's as his nails turned into claws while his shirt and jacket were ripped off. He roared as Moka fell back with a scream. He jumped into the air, rearing his hand back. "You shall be mine, Akashiya Moka," he roared as she closed her eyes. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was heard. When Moka opened her eyes, she saw Naruto holding one finger up, blocking his punch entirely. He smirked, flicking him on the head and sending him to the other side, while Tsukun, Kurumu and Yukari arrived in their true forms, while Tsukun had his nunchaku out. Naruto stopped them with a look, then he raised Moka to her feet and placed her near them. He turned to Jin, who roared, "You're in the way," he said. Naruto closed his eyes, then opened them as an immense pressure fell around them. He raised his arm. "Be honored. It has been a long time since I used this," he said as black flames appeared on his palm. When they disappeared, an enormous greatsword appeared. It was 6 feet tall, slightly smaller than Naruto himself. It had a handle made of black wood with a pommel of iron holding a black diamond. The guard was actually a black wolf's head with rubies as eyes. From its maws came the blade, made of black metal, with both edges colored red. It had writing in an unknown language in the base of the blade, glowing with a red light. He swung it around. "Behold, Akami no Sensu, the Wolf of War," he said. Jin started to sweat at Naruto's increasing aura, while Yukari and Tsukun were panting. Moka and Kurumu were sweating, while huge blushes formed on their faces. They were holding their skirts down, as their legs were closed with pressure. From inside Moka's Rosario, inner Moka was panting, as she felt his immense power, and her body was responding to the feeling of a true alpha. "That's it. If outer doesn't let him claim her soon, I shall force her to," she thought. Naruto placed a sword on his shoulder, smirking at Jin. Jin roared and charged at him, his hand reared back. He instantly swung his sword, muttering, "Vacuum sword." What happened next surprised everyone as a blade of wind came out of the sword, cutting diagonally his chest, blood flowing, while Jin roared in pain. He did the same technique, making an X, then pointed his finger at him. A beam came out and blasted him, forming light. When it cleared, Jin had turned back to his normal form, unconscious and bleeding. Naruto's sword disappeared as a clone was formed, picked up Jin and took him to the infirmary. The real Naruto turned to the group, smirking at their flushed faces, only for them to blush harder. He also smelled their honey and felt their pheromones. He shrugged them off, as it wasn't time yet. He looked up. "It's late. We shall meet tomorrow," he said as they nodded and each went their separate ways, albeit the girls looked at his back for a few moments before leaving. Next day. Naruto was sitting in classroom, ignoring one of Shizuka's boring lessons. He was looking outside the window, thinking about morning's events. They had placed posters, with proof Jin was the pervert. When the girls asked him where he got the photos, he smirked and said it was a secret. The fact he saw Jin chased by girls proved that. In reality, he was a blood clone, the real one had gone to Kurama's seal. It would take him a day to return, so it was up to him to take his place. He was fitted with extra power to regenerate blood quick enough for Moka. He heard the ring and sighed. Shizuka closed her book. "That is all for today. However, I have an announcement to make. In a week from now a tournament shall take place. All males are prompted to attend, females are welcome as well. The winner shall be called Yokai Academy's champion, its strongest monster. Also, the winner will have a choice between 3 prizes. I hope you all attend." She finished, leaving the class. The students murmured amongst themselves. Naruto rubbed his chin, thinking about what Shizuka said. A tournament sounded fun. While there would be no one who could entertain him, the prize sounded as something appealing. He turned when Kurumu jumped him. "You should totally attend, Naruto-kun," she said, before Moka pushed her aside and nodded. "Indeed you should, Naruto-kun," she said, as they both started glaring at each other. Naruto laughed and rose. "Alright. I am going. You guys go to the cafeteria. I will join you," he said as they nodded. Naruto wrote his name in a sheet of paper where all the participants wrote their names for the tournament. He heard a cough and turned, seeing Tamao. She was wearing the student's uniform and was looking down. He raised an eyebrow as she took a breath. She looked at him. "I am sorry I tried to suck your life energy," she said as he shook his head and went back to seeing the participants. "It is nothing." he said, as she blushed. I have something to say, she said, as he turned. She took a deep breath, then said with a large blush, I love you. With closed eyes. She opened them when he heard chuckling. She looked at her with a smile. Is that so? He asked as she nodded. He cracked his neck. I am not ready for a relationship. If you can wait a month or so, that can change, he said with a wink as she glowed from happiness. He waved his hand, going back to class when she called his name. She bowed. I shall root for you, she said, as he nodded with a smirk and went his way. Unknown location. Naruto looked at a large cliff. He was in a mountain, surrounded by a forest. The cliff in front of him was mostly spiked, however, one part was flat. He looked at it and felt the powerful seals placed there. He also felt her aura. Kurama was there. He raised his arm and sent a pulse of his powerful Yaki at the seal. Seal dimension. Inside the seal was another dimension. It was always night, with yellow grass everywhere the eye could see. Only a large rock stood, with an opening. Inside laid Kurama in her nine-tailed fox form, although much smaller. She was currently sleeping as she had nothing better to do. The first century she was sealed here. She tried using her potent Yaki to break the seal, though she only managed to weaken it slightly. Eventually, she gave up and spent the rest of her days sleeping and blasting the barrier. She couldn't train, as she was only a spirit, her body connected to the seal. Once the seal broke, her body would appear and she would be connected to it again. Though it wouldn't seem to happen anytime soon. However, she suddenly felt trembling. She opened her eyes and widened. She felt it. His Yaki. Her master's Yaki. She rose, roaring, and sent her most powerful attacks where she felt his Yaki coming from. Unknown location. Naruto felt her Yaki coming from the seal and grinned. He sent a powerful beam at the seal, corroding it and destroying it. Then a bright flash of red light appeared as the QB's powerful Yaki was felt. He smirked, taking a few steps back. From the light a female figure appeared, kneeling down. Once the light disappeared, he smirked. He looked down at her. Welcome back to the world of the living, Kurama, he said, as he looked at a pair of identical blood-red slitted eyes. Unknown location. It had been so long. So many years since he last saw her. Kurama, or QB no Kitsune, the strongest of the 9 and his second in command. He looked at her. Her appearance was still the same. Blood-red slitted eyes almost identical to his, with a look of mischievousness, adoration and a hint of lust behind them. Flowing crimson hair that reached her waist. A heart-shaped face, with a huge grin upon looking at him. An hergless figure with F-cup friests and a bubblegum rear. She was wearing clothes of the old period. A black friest plate with red lining, with identical gauntlets. She wore black leather pants, with black metal boots of red lining. Her trusty longsword, Kitsunebi, was hanging from her waist. It had a pure black handle, with a red ruby at the pommel. The hilt was wrapped in red cloth, mixed with iron wire. It had a crossguard, with spiked edges. Well hidden from her pitch-black sheath with a 9-tailed red kitsune depiction, the blade was blood red, with orange glowing kanji running along. He made a gesture for her to rise. Don't be so formal, he said. As soon as he said that, she instantly appeared in front of him, wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed her deeply. He smiled in the kiss and returned the favor. She moaned, having longed for his touch for so long. The kiss lasted for about 5 minutes, before Kurama had to catch her breath. She panted with a smile. He smirked. Ease up. You are still weak and you have work to do, he said, as she nodded. She kneeled down, waiting for his command. He licked his lips for a second, savoring the taste of her mouth, then spoke. You are to start releasing all your brothers and sisters. I suggest starting from the Ichibi and go all the way to the Hachibi. That way, if your own Yaki isn't strong enough to break a seal, your siblings shall help you, he said. She nodded as he continued. I shall be at the Yokai Academy. The moment you collect them all, go to it, but stay outside. Unless you feel my actual Yaki released and not my pressure or killer intent, do not enter. That is all, he said. She nodded. Your wish is my command, she said, rising. However, he held her and pushed her down, wrapping his arms around her. As I said, you're still a bit weak from fatigue. Sleep for tonight and you shall leave tomorrow, he said, as he used a spell on her, making her fall asleep. He stayed with her all the night, then left in the morning, leaving her a note. Yokai Academy. Naruto had arrived with teleportation into his dorm before school started, getting a report from his clone. He sighed, glad nothing mind-blowing happened. I also like the articles you wrote. But, you're me, so it's expected, he said, as the clone snickered. Dismissed, he said, and the clone saluted him, disappearing in a red mist. He looked at the side of his bed, seeing a kami no sensu in its black sheath. He picked it up and sat in a yoga stance, the blade between his legs. He closed his eyes, getting inside his mindscape. Naruto's mindscape. He opened his eyes, having not entered his mindscape in a long time. He was in a forest clearing, covered by snow. The sky was black, with a blood-red moon. The moon depicted 4 rings, the 3 innermost filled with 3 tomo each, 9 in total. He looked upon the biggest tree, an iron throne at its bottom. The throne had 2 wolves' heads on the arms of the throne. Above the throne, a black mist started to form. It flew into the air, then dived in front of Naruto. It started to spin as a black wolf appeared. He was large, as tall as Naruto. He had claws the size of Naruto's own fingers, same as his sharp teeth. Red streaks run along his obsidian black fur. His eyes were the same as Naruto's, only red lining, similar to insomnia, surrounded his eyes. All in all, he looked both ferocious and majestic. He nodded towards Naruto. It has been quite a while since you came here, Naruto. He said, his voice booming. Naruto returned the nod. Indeed it has, Sensu. He said. He approached the wolf and patted his head, the wolf smirking. A low growl was heard from it, then a small whine when Naruto stopped. Naruto laughed. I assume you have questions for my plans. He said as the wolf nodded. A sly grin appeared on his face. When will you mate with the vampire and the succubus? He asked with Naruto shaking his head. Perverted wolf. The answer is once they are ready. Maybe after the end of the school year, or if something makes me release my yaki, thus my instincts go haywire. But even in the second case, only if they love me. He said, as Sensu nodded. He then continued. When will you restart your rule? He asked, as Naruto frowned. Next year. I want the Bijuu to pass the summer getting back in shape. Then, at the start of the new year, where I hear parents arrive, I shall install my rule. He said, a small flame appeared in his eyes. Sensu knew that flame all too well. He won't do it like last time. He won't have his Bijuu do the work. No, this time he will do it himself. And I can't wait for the moment. He thought. Sensu nodded. That is all. He said, as Naruto nodded. I shall carry you to school. Be happy, you oversized plushie. He said, vanishing from the mindscape with a grin. He did hear Sensu's roar. Who do you call a plushie, you bastard? Yokai Academy. Naruto opened his eyes, snickering a bit at the angry wolf. He knew Sensu the most, with Sensu knowing him the most as well. That is why he trusted him the most. The fact he was created and was a representation of his swordsman spirit helped. He rose and slung the enormous blade behind his back. However, he decided to abandon his jacket, instead putting on some black armbands. He nodded at the mirror and exited his dorm. He walked at the stand the newspaper club used to distribute newspapers. Only Jin and Sukun were there. They both saw his sword and gulped, especially Jin, who had felt it. Naruto grinned, showing his fangs, then helped organize the newspapers. The girls came a few moments later, with Moka and Kurumu blushing upon seeing his sword and his muscles. Naruto shook his head, giving them newspapers. I know you like what you see, but work first, pleasure later. He said, as their blushes increased, causing Sukun and Jin to snicker, though they shut their mouths when Naruto turned to them with narrowed eyes. Soon, the students started gathering, with all the girls fawning over Naruto's new look and took their newspapers only from him, with Moka and Kurumu glaring at its girl. He noticed the glare from the corner of his eyes and held back a snicker. In less than 10 minutes, they had given their entire stock. Naruto was looking at the last newspaper, reading the articles, while the girls were cheering for a job well done. They were discussing about a celebration when Naruto turned to look behind him and saw a girl approaching. She had long purple hair and icy blue eyes. She was wearing a light brown skirt, a white sweatshirt with dark blue sleeves and a yellow pendant. She was also wearing light and dark purple striped stockings, white shoes and a belt tied to her left leg. She had a lollipop in her mouth. She approached him and said, "Are there any newspapers left?" He nodded, folding it and gave it to her. She smiled and looked at him. "So you're Naruto-kun. You look cuter than I thought," she said. Naruto raised an eyebrow as she turned and waved goodbye. Moka grabbed him. "What was that, Naruto-kun?" she asked as he shrugged, with Kurumu frowning. "I don't like her," she said. Naruto sighed. "No need to think too hard. Let's get school over with and then you can focus on this little celebration," he suggested as their eyes widened and jumped in the air shouting in happiness. Naruto was sitting in the class, watching the clouds passing by from the window as Shizuka was counting the students. Then, the door opened and the girl came as Naruto's interest rose. She walked and sat down a few seats in front of him with Shizuka squealing. "Ah, Shirayuki-san, you came," she said, with the girl nodding. She turned to the class. "Everyone, this is Shirayuki Mizer. Due to some reasons, she was unable of coming to the class. Please welcome her," she said as everyone turned to look at her. Naruto simply sensed her yaki, then went back to his cloud watching, not deeming her a threat. "I wonder what Kurama is doing," he thought. "Desert. Die. Die." Kurama said maniacally, firing bolts of yaki rapidly to every lizard man she could find. This was a technique she invented herself, so good that in fact it piqued even Naruto's interest. She concentrated yaki into her palmar finger and fired it off like a gun. Because of the strength of each shot, the technique was called yaki cannon. It was in fact so strong that each spot a lizardman got hit exploded in a shower of flesh and blood, with a wound also getting burned. Hahaha. I haven't spilled blood in a while. Give it to me. She yelled as one shot tore a lizardman's head off. She suddenly sneezed as one shot was thrown off track and hit the ground, an enormous pile of sand rising. She smiled. Naruto-kun must be thinking of me. I must do better. She thought as she coated her hands in chakra, her nails turning to claws. She rushed and started tearing lizardmen left and right. Yokai Academy. Naruto listened to the girls' plans for the party. He nodded. Alright. We shall meet after school. He said as they nodded. Suddenly, Kurumu started rubbing her fists on his chest. Be ready for my sweets. She said as Moka growled and grabbed her, leading her away. He shook his head with a smirk, then turned to a column. What is it, Mizer? He asked as he heard a yelp. Mizer came out with a smile. Hello. She said, approaching him. She took out his newspaper. I read it. Your articles are as interesting as always. She said, with Naruto smiling. Why thank you. He said. She gave him a scrapbook. I asked Nekonom-sensei to send me each newspaper in my time of absence. I filled all your articles in this scrapbook. I even wrote some comments. She said, with Naruto opening. His eyes started twitching, reading the rather unique comments. He closed the scrapbook and gave it to her. She placed it back. I love your articles. You give everyone's opinion, even the weak, which I can relate to. She said, as Naruto sighed, scratching his head. It is nothing really. He said, as she suddenly wrapped her arm around his. He raised an eyebrow. You are lonely, right? I know how it feels. After all, we think the same. She said with a smile. Naruto, finally understanding where this was going, teleported away, with her in tow. Cliff. He reappeared at the edge of a cliff, with Red Sea below. Mizer looked around surprised, then looked at Naruto. He crossed his arms. What do you mean I am alone? He asked as she tilted her head. We think the same. You are alone. So am I, she explained, as Naruto shook his head. I am not alone. He said, with Mizer frowning. Is it because of Moka Akashiya? She asked, as an icy mist started forming. He raised an eyebrow as she continued. I can't stand her. If you were to go to her, I don't know what I would do. You should be mine. She said. Naruto jumped back, escaping the mist that started surrounding him. Suddenly, Mizer's hair turned to ice, so did her hands. She walked, ice forming around her. I am a Uchiha. I have complete control over ice. Give up, Naruto-kun. We are meant to be together. She said, attempting to freeze him. However, to her shock, the ice started melting as Naruto had one arm on his hip. He said, you are wrong. We are not the same. He said, as her eyes widened. Don't tell me you are rejecting me. Naruto. She yelled as a blizzard formed. However, Naruto released a heat wave, melting all the ice. She growled as she formed 5 ice puppets. Naruto simply sent a wave of pressure that forced her to her knees and destroyed all puppets. He approached her, raising her chin. It isn't that I don't understand you, it is that we do not think alike. I do not mind you loving me. But you should try being yourself and respecting the fact you're unique. Don't try to find or force your way of thinking to someone. He said, rising and turning. He stopped. Come to the newspaper club, we can start off as friends from there. And in the future, who knows? He said, continuing his way, leaving Mizer to think. Yokai Academy. Naruto, Moka, Kurumu, Yukari, Jin and Shizuka were sitting around a table, preparing for the newspaper club party. Suddenly, the door opened and inside came Mizer, her hair cut short. Naruto smirked and rose. Everyone, welcome our newest member Mizer. He said, as the rest of the room waved, albeit the girls reluctantly. She nodded with a small smile, with Jin approaching her. Wow. What a beautiful girl. He said, smiling. She frowned and huffed. I belong only to Naruto-kun. She said, with Jin falling to the ground as Kurumu and Moka glared at her, with Mizer glaring back. Yukari saw the photos Jin carried and started beating him up while Shizuka tried to calm everyone down. Sukun sighed, holding his forehead, while Naruto started sniffing a piece of the cake. Everyone stared at him as he turned to Kurumu. You put love potion inside? He asked as she widened her eyes. How? She asked, with him touching his nose. The nose. He replied. Moka and Mizer growled and started fighting with Kurumu as Naruto turned to Tsukun. I forgot to ask you. Will you attend the tournament? He asked as their ears perked up. Tsukun lost all color in his face, then laughed awkwardly. And fight against you, Naruto-san? No way. He said. Mizer tiled her head. When is this tournament? She asked as Naruto smirked. Tomorrow. He said as the girls widened their eyes. They suddenly formed a circle and whispered, the rest of the room sweat dropping. Naruto facepalm. They will do something really dumb. He thought. Next day. Today was the day of the tournament. 40 students gathered in the stadium meant for fighting events, aiming for the title of champion of Yokai Academy. The tournament lasted from the morning till the afternoon, with students observing from the stands and cheering for whoever they wanted to win. Moka, Yukari, Kurama and Mizer were each wearing a shirt saying "Go Naruto." However, it seemed they weren't the only ones who cheered for him. Tamao and the swimming club had made a large banner saying Naruto is the best. To the boys' envy of Naruto's popularity. Some even thought of battling Naruto, that is, until he reached first place. Each match he fought, he simply flicked his opponents and sent them to the wall unconscious. On the final match, just to give a show, he jabbed one in the stomach, sending him flying to the air. He would have died if Naruto didn't catch him before he crashed into the ground. As he got crowned champion of Yokai Academy, there were 3 prizes. 1. 50,000 gold coins. 2. 3 days off school for him and his club. 3. The ability to skip one of 4 questions in the final exams. Naruto, being the good guy he is, took the second prize, to the happiness of his friends. When they asked when they would take it, he said soon. Next day. Naruto was drinking his coffee in the rooftop when he felt Moka approaching. He turned to her and nodded as she smiled. Naruto-kun. I want to ask you something. She said with a blush. He raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She looked down. Could you come to my dorm later today? I would like your help with studying. She said as he looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Sure, though I am not certain what kind of help you would need. He said. She squealed and glomped him. Thank you. She said, then smiled. Can I have your blood? She asked as he showed his neck. With a smile, she bit on him, instantly moaning at the sweet taste of his blood. She unconsciously started rubbing herself on him, his blood starting to become an aphrodisiac. He held back a soft groan as his instincts were starting to get the better of him. He pushed them down, long enough for her to finish. She licked the leftover blood, then smiled and hugged him. She then left the room, not noticing Naruto's amused smile. He sighed, turning back to the view. He thought about what she said. Homework helped my ass. I wonder what she wants. Then he heard a voice in her head. Probably wants to bang you. Said Sensu, as Naruto huffed. This is Moka, not Kurama. The best chances of you being relatively right is if she asks to be my mate. He said, with Sensu cackling. Oh trust me, I will be right, relatively or not, I will be right. He replied, before going back to silence. Naruto thought about it, then shook his head. He would find out soon enough. Moka's dorm. Moka was anxious about Naruto's arrival. She had done all the preparations. She cleaned her dorm, brushed her teeth, bathed and wore her extra uniform. That one was brand new. She also placed a faint touch of perfume on her. She was fidgeting inside her room until she heard a knock on the door. She rushed, opening it. There stood Naruto, looking exactly like today, only cleaner, and he was wearing his jacket. May I come in? He asked as she nodded with a smile. He entered, observing Moka's dorm. Everything was tidy, clean and perfectly organized. She sat in her chair as Naruto sat in the bed. They started going over Moka's homework. Naruto laughed inside his head at Moka's attempts to write fake answers. After a while, he turned to her. Moka, I think you know I am not stupid enough to not see you purposely wrote fake answers. What is it that you wanted to say? He asked, turning fully to her. She blushed, looking at the ground. I am. How to say it? She was interrupted as Naruto kissed her on the lips. She widened her eyes for a few seconds, then closed them, returning the kiss. He rose her, then brought her down on his lap, causing her to moan. The kiss continued for a minute before Moka had to catch her breath. He looked at her with a smile. I love you too. He said, as she squealed and kissed him. They continued for minutes upon minutes. Then, as it had gotten late, Naruto was about to leave, but Moka held his arm. Please stay. She said with a puppy look. Naruto sighed. You need to sleep. He said. She nodded. Then sleep with me. She said, an enormous blush on her face. He shook his head with a smile, then leaned in the bed as she did so as well. He wrapped his arm around her as she leaned on him. She closed her eyes with a smile, falling asleep. He simply stayed awake all night thinking about the future. Next day. The following morning, Naruto woke up Moka with a kiss on the forehead. She yawned, rising, then remembered last night's events with a blush. Naruto turned to her as he was putting on his boots. You should visit the bathroom. School starts in 20 minutes. He said, as she yelped. She instantly went to the bathroom as Naruto packed up her things. Once she came out, he gave her her bag and placed his sword on his back. He zipped his jacket. We have club session first. He said as she nodded. However, her stomach growled and she blushed. He smiled as he showed her his neck. She bit on it, feeding herself. After getting her fill, they went to class together, with Moka holding his arm. The moment they entered, Kurama and Mizer both sent death glares to Moka, understanding what happened. They both sat down as Shizuka started. Guess what everyone? I have great news. She said, getting raised eyebrows. In 2 days, each club shall go on a training trip. The newspaper club was allowed to go to the human world. She exclaimed, getting gasps from most of them, with Tsukun sweating. He rose his arm. Are you sure this is a good idea, sensei? He asked, as she nodded of course. I think. She added with Tsukun banging his head on the desk. Moka looked scared and turned to Naruto. He whispered in her ear, don't worry. All will be fine. He said, though his mind was working overtime, the human world It has been a century since I visited it. I wonder how it looks. He thought. Thus. The day was the day that the newspaper club would go to the human world. Naruto was waiting outside the bus, leaning on its hood while twirling around a stick he found on the ground. He was whistling an eerie tune that made the bus driver feel scared, while Shizuka didn't even get its dreadful feeling, only liking the fact he could whistle. He had changed his attire. He still wore black jeans, only this time he wore black and red sneakers. He had a normal black belt with a silver buckle. He had a red shirt that was open, showing his black tank top with a weird eye on it. It was red, with 4 rings and 9 tomo in the 3 innermost rings, 3 on each ring. He also had a silver watch on his left hand and a black leather bracelet with a silver plate on it on his right. Finally, around his neck was his necklace. His sword was missing, too noticeable in the modern world. Suddenly, he turned and smiled as he saw Moka. She was wearing a yellow sundress with a thin pink jacket above. She also had a brown suitcase. She smiled in return, then blushed at his look. She looked down at her clothes. Are my clothes weird? She asked, to which Naruto shook his head. You look fantastic. He said, as she smiled. She leaned on him as he wrapped his arms around her. Hey Naruto-kun, you remember that I told you I was in a human school once? She asked, to which he nodded. I am a bit nervous of reliving those memories. She exclaimed, to which he started rubbing her head affectionately. Don't worry. We are here to have fun. I won't allow any sadness on this trip. He said, to which she sighed happily. She turned and gave him a kiss, to which he returned. However, they soon had to stop as Naruto caught an ice kunai. They turned, seeing Kurumu and Mizer looking pissed and Yukari looking jealous. Kurumu approached them. What is this? She yelled, to which Naruto shrugged. What? Can't I kiss my mate? He asked, to which the girls widened their eyes and Moka looked at the ground embarrassed. At this moment Tsukun arrived, feeling the tension. Kurumu marched on Moka. How dare you steal my destined one? She growled, as Naruto coughed. You know, I can take multiple mates. He said, as silence fell. The girls blinked, then enormous blushes appeared on their faces. What? They exclaimed. Naruto rose from the hood of the bus as he made his way to the entrance. Strong monsters have the ability to take multiple mates. Instead of fighting for my attention, I suggest attempting to gain it. He explained. Now come on. Time for a trip. He finished, jumping inside. The girls looked at each other, then nodded, communicating as if they were telepathic. All 3 entered the bus together, with Yukari and Tsukun looking at each other. With a sigh, they jumped on the bus as well. Naruto took a seat alongside Moka, Kurumu, and Mizer sat behind them, while Yukari and Tsukun in front. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Where's Jin? He asked, as Kurumu smirked. He isn't done with his remedial tests. She said, with Yukari looked at her. You're one to talk. She said, with Kurumu faking being hurt. I finished on time. She said to her defense. More like you skipped class on time. Mizer deadpanned, as everyone burst out laughing. Shizuka smiled and explained them how the trip would go and that they should have fun, to which everyone cheered. The trip so far had been rather uneventful. Naruto was looking outside the window, with Moka's head leaning on his chest as he rubbed her back, causing her to sigh in happiness. Suddenly, a flash of light surrounded them as they entered the human world. The girls looked in wonder, seeing the large buildings and advanced technology. Tsukun yelled, I am back, causing everyone to look at him. Naruto sighed. We know it's been a while since you visited the human world, but try to hold yourself. He said, as Kurumu raised an eyebrow. He has visited the human world? She asked, as Tsukun nodded. Yes, for holiday. He said, sweat dripping from his forehead. She nodded as they continued their journey in peace. Beach. They had arrived at the beach to relax and have some fun. Naruto wore the same swim shorts he wore in the pool, Moka wore a white swimsuit, Kurumu wore a black bikini, while Mizer wore a purple bikini, with the top similar to a sports bra and the pants looking like shorts. Tsukun wore green swim shorts, while Yukari wore a yellow swimsuit with a skirt and her witch hat. They were on the shore, playing with a yellow ball. Naruto slapped the ball towards Tsukun, who bounced it off towards Mizer. She hit it with the top of her fist, as Kurumu jumped in the air and slammed it towards the ground. Moka skidded to the ground, hitting it towards Yukari. She went to slap it towards Naruto, only for Kurumu to hit it instead, to her anger. She turned to her. I challenge you. She said, as the boys sighed. Kurumu smirked. A lady always accepts a challenge. She said, as both of them slapped the ball Naruto's way. He used his head to headbutt it to the air, as Moka hit it towards Mizer. She slapped the ball into the air as Kurumu jumped and sent it to the ground. Yukari skidded and sent it up as Moka sent it to her again. Then, she took out her hand, forming a large azure hand, striking the ball with power, only for Naruto to catch it. He then started rubbing her head. "No magic," he said, as she whined. Meanwhile, Shizuka was enjoying a large plate of fish. Everything was great as the teens and centuries-old demon relaxed. An hour had passed as Naruto and Moka were sitting at the shore. Sukun and the others were playing inside the water. Suddenly, Moka leaned her head in Naruto's shoulder as he wrapped an arm around her waist. They were about to kiss. "Hey Naruto-kun, come join us." Before they were interrupted by Kurumu. Naruto sighed as Moka smiled. "Go. You should have lots of fun now that we're at the beach," she said as Naruto shook his head. A clone appeared and dived into the sea as they all started playing. Naruto turned back to her. "Now we can be together and they can have fun," he said as she looked at him happily. She wrapped her fingers around his as he pulled her close, kissing her gently. She pushed her weight onto him as his back touched the ground with her sitting on top of him. They kept kissing for hours before Moka went to drink his blood. However, Kurumu and Mizer jumped at her, pushing her off Naruto. They started fighting, with the clone separating them. Naruto sighed, however, he suddenly looked up. He narrowed his eyes as everyone looked at sunflowers on the top of the hill. Naruto turned to the clone. "Tell Shizuka we shall go for a walk, then dispel," he said as the clone nodded and disappeared. Naruto snapped his fingers as clothes appeared in a puff of smoke. He now wore a red tank top and black shorts, along with red sandals. Moka put on a pink jacket, Mizer put on a black open jacket, while Kurumu wore an open yellow shirt. Sukun wore a white t-shirt and Yukari a magenta hoodie. They walked as they observed the beautiful landscape around them. The sunflower field was massive. Sunflowers rose all the way the eye could see. Sukun sighed in content, smelling the nature surrounding them. However, the peace soon ended as Yukari and Kurumu started fighting when Yukari dropped a basin at Kurumu's head as they argued about Naruto. Sukun went between them. Now. Let's all get along," he said as they huffed and continued their way. No one, except Naruto, sensed a presence a few feet away. She wore a pink corset, a long black skirt with frills at the end, and purple high heels. She had long brown hair, kept in 2 ponytails and pink eyes. She was holding a sunflower. "That girl. There is no mistake. I have to inform Master," she thought, vanishing. As soon as she did, Naruto smirked. Nighttime came as they prepared their shelter. Everyone was there, except Naruto who had gone for firewood and Shizuka who had gone for fish. Human world fish were too delicious to pass by, according to her. Yukari approached Sukun, who was holding a mobile fridge. "Need help?" she asked as he smiled. "Thank you. But this is too heavy for you," he said as Kurumu helped him. She then went to Moka, who was cutting carrots. Moka grinned at her. "Thank you Yukari-chan, but I can manage." "We don't want you to cut yourself, do we?" she asked rhetorically as Yukari sighed. She went inside the tent only to hear "Kids will get in the way," instantly leaving. She sat down at the shore, watching the waves. "I am not a kid. I can do many things," she exclaimed with a frown. Suddenly, she felt a presence, seeing a young woman. Yukari rose as the woman smiled. "Calm down, little witch," she said as Yukari rose an eyebrow. "How do you know I am one?" To which the girl introduced herself. "I am Ruby Toho, a witch of this hill. I have been observing you since the morning, glad I found another witch," she said, showing her own wand. Yukari let down her own. "A pleasure to meet you," she said as Ruby smiled. "Will you be my friend Yukari-chan?" she asked as Yukari nodded. She grinned, hugging her. They sat down, talking about themselves. Suddenly, Ruby changed subject. "Humans attempt to destroy this field. That is why I shall destroy them," she exclaimed to Yukari's surprise. Ruby turned to her. "You will help me Yukari-chan, won't you?" she asked as Yukari raised her arms. "Hold on, I can't just," she started but was interrupted by Ruby. "It is alright. Preparations are finished. All that is needed is to complete the master's plan," she said, rising and outstretching her arm. "What do you say, Yukari-chan? Shall we live here with the master?" For she was about to finish but was interrupted. "So this is where you were?" a voice said. Both turned as Naruto appeared from the forest. Yukari smiled. "Naruto-kun," she said as he smiled at her, then frowned towards Ruby, who had her wand pointing towards him, a pink glow coming from it. Suddenly, dozens of plant beasts started swarming Naruto, attempting to bite him and crush him. Naruto huffed, then simply slapped the air as a large shockwave rocked the area, smashing all monsters. Ruby widened her eyes, then wings appeared from her back and flew into the air. She waved her wand at him, the monsters now hundreds, as Yukari yelled at her to stop. Naruto growled enough and swung his arm with force as he instantly destroyed all of the plants. Yukari looked at Naruto, then narrowed her eyes as she chose what to do. Waving her wand at Ruby, she sent an energy blast at her that sent her falling back, stopping the fight effectively. Then the others came, as Yukari fell to the ground panting. "Yukari-chan," yelled Kurumu, as she, Mizer and Sukun rushed at her. Kurumu growled at her, "Don't be so reckless," she said, as Yukari smiled. "I am fine. Simply tired," she said, with Sukun kneeling and pointing at his back. Instead, Yukari bowed towards Ruby. "I am sorry, Ruby-san, I can't come with you. My friends are too important," she said, to Ruby's surprise. Yukari then walked away, with the other three following. Moka rushed at Naruto, smiling. "After you took a while to come, I got worried," she said, as he held her shoulders. "Why? I am fine. I won't ever leave you," he said, as she smiled, her eyes filled with love. They went for a kiss until blood spurted everywhere. Moka widened her eyes in shock as a vine pierced Naruto's heart. Naruto simply looked down at it, an expressionless, almost dead, look on his face. Moka widened her eyes as the rest saw what happened. Ruby's wand was glowing. "Yukari-chan shall come with me, as my master desires," she yelled. Then, Moka cried, as an enormous wave of Yaki was unleashed, as inner Moka was released. Mizer turned into her true form, as her eyes glowed blue. Kurumu growled, "How dare you?" As her eyes glowed pink and she also turned to her true form. The wave of Yaki was too much for Ruby, as she could only look in surprise, before she was enveloped in a flash of Yaki. Dent. Ruby woke up, looking at an alive Naruto and the rest of the people in their normal forms looking at her. She turned to him. "How are you still alive?" she asked, to which he smirked. "Vines are too weak to pierce the real me. You only pierced a clone," he said, as she frowned. "Then why use a clone?" she asked, as he turned and gave Mizer and Kurumu a wink, as they blushed for information. He said, then crossed his arms. "Now, tell me. Why do you want to kill the humans?" he said. She looked down. "We did nothing wrong. Then the humans came and ruined everything. They smashed, crashed and burned. So, I will kill them, so they can." She was interrupted, as Naruto threw a can at her. She moaned, holding her bruised forehead. He rose. "Don't be an idiot. Killing humans because they destroy your land makes you the same as them, inflicting pain on others. Every life matters, whether human or monster," he said, as she widened her eyes. He then made a clone, as he spawned his blade and placed it on his back. The clone grabbed her, as the real Naruto opened the tent. "Time to meet this master of yours," he said, to the shock of Ruby and the others. Church. The group walked towards the church, seeing a figure waiting outside. She had gray hair and wore a brown dress, torn in several parts. She looked at them with red eyes. "Welcome to your oblivion," she said. She turned to Ruby and frowned. "So, you betrayed me?" she hissed, with Naruto approaching. "I forced her to lead me to you," he said, as she turned to him. She smirked, sending a dozen plants at him. He punched the air, as a force struck all the plants, crushing them instantly. She smirked. "Oh, you're strong, huh? Well, I shall crush you and your friends instantly," she said, as all the plant monsters in the entire ranch appeared. Suddenly, they started to unite, forming 5 enormous monsters. They growled, as the witch raised her arm to the sky. The humans came and destroyed everything. "Yet you, Yokai, you helped them by stopping me. You are a disgrace to all monsters," she said, as Naruto's eyes were hidden by his bangs. She raised her hand down. "Die, you abomination," she yelled, as the monsters surrounded him and prepared to skewer him. The others widened their eyes, screaming his name. To the shock of everyone, an enormous force blasted from his body, destroying the monsters, pushing back everyone. The ground crumbled, rocks broke, pebbles turned to dust. A black aura started rising from him as his eyes turned red with 4 rings and 9 tomo. His nails turned to claws, his teeth to fangs. The witch took a step back as her eyes widened. Naruto grinned. "I think you're mistaken. That is my line. And it is meant for you," he said, as he unsheathed his blade. "Which is null." The witch took a step back. She looked at Naruto in pure fear. She knew those eyes. She knew them well. She only read ancient witch tomes and heard stories from her ancestors, some of them kids who had lived through that chaos, but she knew them. The eyes of the Alpha. The eyes of the king. The eyes of a god. Said to be possessed by the monster, no, the demon, who had brought the world to its knees, bowing before him, centuries ago. The being not even the famous 3 Dark Lords could challenge. The being not even Alucard or Shinso, the most famous and strength vampires in existence, could fight. She growled at him. "Impossible. You can't be him," she yelled at him, pure terror in her eyes. Naruto simply raised his sword to the sky, as an enormous pillar of black fire rose from it. The black fire started to compress at the tip of the sword, forming a black fire orb, the size of a pebble. The ground started to evaporate from the sheer heat, the same with Naruto's clothes, despite their durability. She took a step back. That small orb had enough power to kill her 10 times. She instantly started using her chance to form a dome covering her, a barrier to keep her alive. Every defensive spell, every powerful chant, every curse she knew and all the magic plant monsters remains aided her. Soon, a green dome was formed, made of wood and plants, glowing a faint magenta. Naruto pointed his sword at her and said Hell Cannon. As the orb blasted from the sword towards her at amazing speeds. As soon as it touched the dome, it became an enormous stream of hellfire that consumed the entire dome. Screams could be heard as the fire instantly broke through the dome and burned the witch alive. When the attack was over, nothing was left. A giant scar was all that was left, its ground scorched, with fire still burning on it. In the center you could see a small dome of fire, along with ash, the remains of the witch. With a snap of his fingers, all the fire disappeared. Naruto then turned to the group. Yukari and Sukune looked at Naruto in amazement, along with slight fear. Moka, Kurama and Mizer looked at him with wonder and lust. He could also see Moka's Rosario gem now turned into a slitted eye, filled with need. Finally, Ruby was at her knees, looking at him. Lust, need, desire, weakness towards him, all those could be seen in his eyes. He approached her, as she fidgeted at his terrifying gaze, his power surrounding him. He growled towards her bow. He said, his voice deep, filled with pure authority. She instantly did so, her head touching the ground. Who do you serve? He asked, as she looked at him. Naruto-sama. She said, as he growled again from this day forth, you're my slave. If I say jump, you ask how high. If I say kill, you ask who and when. If I say pleasure, you instantly begin. Is that understood? He asked, as she nodded with a smile, looking at him in happiness. He raised his arm and threw a tiny wave of Yaki at her, as she collapsed to the ground. His power receded, as his eyes turned back to slitted blood red. He picked her up bridal style, as he turned to them. I don't think we should be staying here for long. He said, as all they could do was nod. Yokai Academy. One day had passed since the return of Naruto and his friends to Yokai Academy. Naruto suggested to Tenmei, in other words forced with Tenmei's life on the line, that Ruby is given a job related to magic until he finished dealing with school. So Tenmei had her guard the tunnel Yokai Academy used to get to the human world from the human side. Naruto gave her a seal, which would allow him to communicate with her, along with teleporting her to his location. The first time he used more than his normal power, in other words, use one tail worth of power. He was currently sitting at his dorm, drinking vodka. He had to admit, humans made interesting food and drinks. It was unable for him to get drunk, so he was easily able to gulp down large quantities, without any fear. He smiled at its taste. It was a gift from Kurama. Suddenly, he felt a presence in his room and turned, seeing Kurama. He raised an eyebrow, all the while drinking vodka. What are you doing here? He asked from his chair, while Kurama lied down on the bed, turning to him with a smile. 7 of the Bijuu are currently free. In a day or two, Jayuki would be free. She replied, while he filled his glass again. I mean, why are you in my dorm? He asked, as she pouted. Can't I get a break? To be with my master? She whined. Naruto sighed, filling another glass and giving it to her. She gulped it down instantly, then her face became red. He raised an eyebrow as she started panting. He turned to the bottle, only to widen his eyes. He cursed, damn succubus. Putting aphrodisiacs to my drink, he said, as Kurama rose, a lustful look on her face. He placed the glass down, as his iris became wider, with his slits becoming narrower. Then again, I haven't had the chance of pleasure for a few centuries. He said, as his muscles tensed. She grinned seductively, as she jumped on his lap. Lemon happened. 2 days later. Naruto sighed in content, drinking his coffee. It was early in the morning, 1 hour before the start of school. He kept going with Kurama for hours, until evening had arrived. Afterwards, they slept together and she left the following morning. He spent the next 2 days relaxing, spending time with the girls, progressing with all 3 of them. He even went to check on Ruby, to see what she was doing. He found out she had quite a bit of a master-servant complex, as she asked if he was horny and needed to use her to calm his desires, which earned her a spanking. Though if he had to admit, she seemed to enjoy it. Heck, he enjoyed it. That was the day he found out Ruby had a firm rear. But that was 2 days ago. Today was the day of school. He met up with Tsukune, as Tsukune waved at him and he nodded in return. The walk to school was in silence, as both of them seemed to enjoy the tranquility. He felt Tsukune's aura and nodded to himself. Tsukune had trained the last 3 days. He felt it. He was around the level of a D-rank monster. For a human, that was most impressive. I am pleased. You are officially the strongest pure human in existence. He said, as Tsukune blushed and said thank you. I have mastered about 40% of what it could offer. He said, to which Naruto nodded. Then, once you mastered it, you will be near the strength of a B-rank monster. Quite good if I do say so myself. He said, earning a thankful nod from Tsukune. The rest of the walk was in silence. As soon as they arrived at school, they noticed Moka, Kurama, Mizer and Yukari handing out newspapers. He smiled as the girls waved at him. He waved back as he and Tsukun started opening packets of newspapers. A large crowd had formed up and the need for newspapers had rose. Suddenly, a pathway was opened as 5 people, 4 boys and 1 girl, entered. They all wore black uniforms with white lining. The girl seemed to be the one who was leading them. She had long purple hair and purple eyes with an angular face full of arrogance. She wore a black miniskirt with a white belt along with a black Chinese-style shirt that left her stomach bare, revealing the bottom of her cup-wrists and black shoes. She smirked. "What is going on here?" she asked as Moka approached her with a smile, holding a newspaper high. "We are the newspaper club, please check our articles," she said, giving her a newspaper. The woman took it, reading it. She smirked before ripping it to pieces, to the shocks of the girls. She snapped her fingers. "What is this? This newspaper doesn't work according to school," she said before one of the men kicked down their stand. However, it was the last thing he did before he was jabbed in the forehead and sent crashing into a tree, courtesy of Naruto. 2 men fell into fighting stances next to the woman as the last charged at Naruto, only to get hit by the end of an nunchaku coming from Tsukun. Naruto slowly walked forward as the 2 men charged at him together, only for him to jab both of their chins at the same time, sending them flying into the air. They crashed a few feet away, both unconscious. He turned towards the girl. "Who are you?" he asked. She frowned. "My name is Kido, champion of Yokai Academy. And I am telling you, you and your group are in deep trouble now," she said before leaving. Naruto narrowed his eyes as the students started leaving. Kurumu started sobbing, looking at their ruined stand as Moka held her. Naruto clenched his fist, then turned to Tsukun. "Tell Jin to come to the club room in 5 minutes or I will cut off both of his arms, permanently," he growled as Tsukun gulped and rushed off to get him. They all gathered to the club room with a sweating Jin and Tsukun inside. Naruto was leaning at the wall, his arms crossed to his Kido. He asked as Jin widened his eyes. He looked down. "She is an officer of the Public Safety Commission," he said as Naruto narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" he demanded. Jin sighed and started explaining. "They are a violent version of a student police. A militant group created to ensure the school is at peace by crashing all evil activities. That is the school's police force, the Public Safety Commission," he said. Kurumu banged her hand on the table. "But they do no good. They just attacked our stand," she protested as Jin continued. "Their power has made them corrupt. They are nothing like the force when the school was first working. They now get money and tributes from students or clubs who don't want to be in their sights," he explained, with Moka looking sad. "To think something so bad is happening at school," she said. "This recent event may be the reason why we are now to their sights," he said as Tsukun protested. "Wait. If they are doing evil activities, then we must write about them." Kurumu rose, nodding. "That's right. We shall write bad articles about them," she said as Jin rose. "Burn them. No room for anything else," he said as everyone looked at him. Mizer stood up. "Why?" she asked as Jin made his way to the door. "This is an official decision of the club," he said before he felt red. Turning, he saw Naruto looking at him, his eyes cold. "Jin. You're hiding something. Tell me or I shall force you to tell me," he said as Jin's eyebrow was filled with sweat. "What do you mean?" he asked as Naruto released a small amount of power, Jin stumbling back. Betting the meaning, he sat back down. "Ever wondered why I am the only senior member of the newspaper club?" he asked as they nodded. "Back to my first year, an event occurred regarding the Public Safety Commission, so we wrote articles regarding them. The result, they destroyed our club. With violence," he muttered as the girls looked at him in shock. "That is why we can't do anything," he said as Naruto pushed himself off the wall. Everyone looked at him as he was frowning. After a few moments, he nodded. "I shall go find Kido," he said as Jin rose. "Uchiha," he yelled as Naruto flicked him away. He rushed outside, the others thinking about all they learned. Behind the academy sat Kido with a group of students. She was giving them orders when the students fell asleep. She narrowed her eyes, jumping back. She turned as Naruto walked towards her. She frowned for a second, then smirked, placing an arm at her hip. Well, if it isn't Naruto, the champion," she said sarcastically as Naruto crossed his arms. "Tell me who your leader is," he said as she looked at him. "What? Feel like joining us?" she asked as he shook his head. "No, to force him to stop the Public Safety Commission's harassment," he said as she laughed loudly. She looked at him with a crazed look in her eyes. "Prepare to die," she said. Suddenly, to Naruto's interest, her stomach split apart, revealing 8 black and yellow striped legs. She smirked. "I am a Joragumo," she said, sending a string of web from her mouth. Naruto raised his arm as it was glued to his wrist. Then, with a small tug, she was instantly sent flying towards him as he grabbed her neck. She squirmed in pain as he looked at her, releasing his power as she cowered in fear. "Name," he said. "Kaio." She breathed out as he nodded. "Thank you," he said. He was about to finish her. "Just so you know, your leader will be defeated and you will have a front row seat," he said before chopping her neck as she fell unconscious. He formed a clone and had her delivered to the infirmary. He then took out a piece of paper and wrote something. With a nod to himself, he left. The SCHQ. A tall, lean man, with long blonde hair and gold eyes, wearing the Public Safety Commission's uniform, was sitting inside an office, dealing with paperwork. Suddenly, 3 people rushed in, 2 men and 1 woman. The Redeed, with a gulp, placed down a box in his table. He raised an eyebrow, opening it, before his eyes were filled with anger. Inside were the head of the 4 members of Kito's squad. There was also a piece of paper. He took it, reading it. "Greetings. You must be Kaio. This is a warning. Stand down, leave the newspaper club alone, and start having the Public Safety Commission do good for once. If you do not, I will find you and have you join them in the same manner. Signed, Naruto, the champion of Yokai Academy." Kaio looked angry before a smirk fell on his face. He chuckled lightly to the confusion of the 3 other occupants before he burned the paper. His eyes held a crazed look. "So, you want to go against me, Naruto? Well, I shall personally ensure you and your club become history," he said as a small golden aura with a blue outline surrounded his body for a moment. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.